My story is a bit tangled, but I'll try my best to explain. I'm Sarah, almost 33 years old, and I've been married to John for 5 years. At first, we had so much fun together and truly enjoyed each other's company. However, over time, our relationship started to feel different. We fell into a comfortable routine, but it soon became repetitive and dull. They say couples sometimes get too comfortable with each other, and I think that's what happened to us. Yet, I believed everything was fine. Or at least that's how it seemed to me. About a year ago, John's work became much more demanding, and he started traveling for business. This was a new experience for both of us since he had never traveled for work before. While he was taking care of our finances, and I had my own job, something felt off. Even when he was home, it wasn't the same. Our conversations felt distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told myself it was just the stress of his job. But deep down, I had my doubts. From the outside, our marriage seemed to be falling apart. But I thought it wasn't as bad as it looked. I convinced myself this was just the way things were now. Then, one evening, something strange happened. I came home from work to find John already there. He usually didn't get home before 11 p.m., but it was only 8 p.m. I was surprised to see him. And when he greeted me with a simple, "Welcome home," it felt off. I asked why he was home so early. John told me that his father, George, had been in an accident at work and was in the hospital. A car had hit George's while running a red light. The accident left George paralyzed in both legs and one arm. While his life wasn't in immediate danger, he would now need a wheelchair. This was devastating news, especially because George loved activities like hiking and fishing. Now, he'd be reliant on a wheelchair and others for help. Soon after, my mother-in-law Linda shocked me by telling me that she and John were planning to move out, leaving me to take care of George full-time. The real shock came when I realized she was also supporting John's affair. They were planning to move in with Tiffany, who also lived with George. Despite George's urgent need for care, they seemed indifferent to his well-being. I was furious and hurt, but I couldn't bear the thought of leaving George alone to struggle. Then something utterly unexpected happened. To my shock, George, who I believed would be bound to his wheelchair forever, suddenly stood up. I was speechless, having thought he was incapable of walking. This twist left me confused and uncertain, wondering what other surprises might be in store. In that moment, I was overwhelmed by the betrayal, the secrets, and the shocking actions of those around me. My life had taken an unexpected turn, and I had no idea what the future would bring. George was always so kind and treated me like his own daughter. He was the type of person who would help anyone, and seeing him in a wheelchair after the accident broke my heart. He was hit by another car that ran a red light, and the accident left him unable to use both his legs and one arm. Knowing he would now rely on others for even the simplest tasks was painful, especially for a man who loved staying active. After the accident, Linda called John to let him know what had happened. My husband, John, works for a different company than his father, so he couldn't leave right away to be with him. John felt frustrated that he couldn't be there to see his dad. And I was saddened that such a kind man was now in a wheelchair. All because of an accident that wasn't his fault. But there was no time to dwell on it. When John looked at me, he said, "Sarah, Mom has a favor to ask about Dad." I was curious and asked, "What does she need?" John replied, "She's asking if we can help take care of him together. Mom's getting older, and she thinks it will be hard to do it all on her own." "So you're saying we need to move to your parents' house?" I asked, surprised. "Yes," he said, "there's enough space for us there. And it would mean a lot to both Mom and Dad. Is that okay with you?" I didn't know how to respond. I truly cared about George, but taking on a role as a full-time caregiver was something I had never done before. The idea was overwhelming. John sensed my hesitation and held my hand, saying, "I know it's a big change and will be hard at first. But if we leave everything to Mom, she'll struggle too. Please, Sarah, I know we can do this if we work together. It's going to be tough." I replied honestly. I also have a job. How am I supposed to balance everything? John looked at me and, after a pause, said, "I want you to quit your job and focus on taking care of Dad with Mom." I'll handle all the financial stuff. Please. This means so much. I was taken aback. Quitting my job felt like a huge sacrifice. But John's desperation and my respect for his father made it hard to say no. After thinking it over, I agreed and quit my job to start taking care of George alongside Linda. As time passed, our routine settled in. Then, one evening during dinner, John made an unexpected announcement. He stood up and said, "I've decided to take over Dad's company and become its president." This news shocked everyone, especially George. He had never expected John, who had always avoided working in his father's business, to take on such a big responsibility. With tears in his eyes, George looked at John and said, "Thank you, John. I was worried about the future of the company, but now I feel relieved." John looked at his father with determination and said, "I want to take care of it for you." In that moment, I saw how deeply John cared for his family and how much his father's well-being meant to him. Our lives had changed so much, and we all faced new challenges. But together we were finding a way to make it work, no matter how tough things became. "Yes, I'll do my best as a son," John told his father, reassuring him. His father, now chairman of the company, said, "Please make sure it's a good place to work for everyone." John promised he would. Soon, John officially took over as president of his father's company, while George, though technically retired, kept the chairman role. He left the day-to-day running of the company to John. But there was still plenty of work to be done. At first, I was proud of John. He was handling big responsibilities, and I knew this job was a big step for him. But within just 3 months, John started coming home very late, almost every night. I thought it was because he was still getting used to his role. But 3 months of constant late nights seemed a bit strange. Then something else started bothering me. One night, I stayed up late, unable to sleep. When John finally came in, I noticed he had a strong smell of soap. That was unusual. I asked him about it, curious, but instead of explaining, he became defensive. He quickly said he was just working hard because taking over a business wasn't easy. Then he brushed me off, heading to bed without another word. I tried to ignore my feelings, but his reaction just made me more uneasy. Every time I tried to ask more, he would get irritated and snap at me. One evening, after a long and exhausting day, I tried to talk to John calmly. I wasn't trying to accuse him of anything, I was just curious about what was going on. But he seemed to misunderstand me, accusing me of not appreciating all the hard work he was putting in. "I'm doing this for us, so we can have a better life," he snapped angrily. I tried to apologize, but he ignored me, went upstairs, and made a racket as he moved around the room. Clearly irritated, he turned his back to me, scrolling through his phone, refusing to listen. The following day, I was taken by surprise when Linda showed up at the house. Visibly angry, she told me that John had shared our argument with her, and she accused me of doubting him just because he was working hard for me. I tried to explain that I wasn't accusing him, but simply wanted to understand. But she wasn't interested in hearing my side. She scolded me for making John feel uncomfortable and then left, leaving all the housework to me. It felt incredibly unfair. Linda had always acted like we shared the chores, but in reality, I was the one doing everything, including caring for George. During the day, she would find excuses to go out and only return in the evening. George, who spent most of his time in his room, didn't notice how often she was gone. She even warned me not to mention anything about her absences to him or John. Her attitude only added to the tension in our home. Despite my frustration, I kept silent and continued with the housework and caregiving. The days felt increasingly heavy, and it seemed like no one truly appreciated my efforts. I knew Linda didn't think highly of me, but I had no choice but to keep going, hoping things might eventually improve. The only reason I could endure such a difficult situation was because of George. Every time I helped him, he would genuinely apologize, saying, "Sarah, I'm so sorry. You must hate taking care of an old man like me." I would always reassure him, "Don't worry about it. I see you as my real father. I'm happy to help." He would smile and reply, "I'm so glad John married someone as kind as you, Sarah. Despite all the trouble I've caused with my care, You're always so gentle and kind to me. I'm lucky, I would respond. I'm the lucky one to have such a caring father-in-law. His kindness and gratitude gave me the strength to keep going, even though my husband and mother-in-law's behavior made me feel uncomfortable and isolated. My routine was to help George settle in for the night and then turn off the lights before heading to bed. One evening, after finishing with George, I returned to the living room and was shocked to find John and his mother there. It was unusual for both of them to be around, and something felt off. My suspicions were confirmed when Linda dropped a bombshell. Good timing, Sarah, she said. We need to talk. From now on, you'll be responsible for taking care of Scott for the rest of his life. I was confused. What do you mean? I asked, trying to make sense of it. Before I could fully understand what was happening, John handed me divorce papers. I have someone else, he said coldly. We're leaving to live with her. You can handle the divorce papers on your own. I was stunned and devastated. As they packed their bags and ignored my tears, I sat alone in the silent living room. Heartbroken, tears streamed down my face, and I felt utterly lost. Just then, George appeared in his wheelchair. Sarah, what's wrong? I heard some noise and came to check on you, he asked. Concerned, I struggled to find the right words. My heart weighed down with pain and confusion. After a moment, I told him everything that had happened. His face grew serious, and I could see the anger in his eyes. To my surprise, he then stood up, his voice suddenly strong and confident. Let's fight back, he said firmly. I stared in shock, glancing at his legs. He apologized for keeping it a secret and revealed that he could actually walk. Then, from a drawer, he took out a large envelope and showed me its contents. Evidence of John's infidelity and even Linda's. Stunned, I listened as he explained. Since John became president, he'd been leaving work right on time but coming home very late. This made George suspicious, so he hired Detective Miller to look into it. The investigator uncovered John's affair, and further investigation revealed that Linda had been unfaithful as well, explaining her frequent absences during the day. In fact, she seemed fully aware of John's affair and even supported it. There were photos of them meeting together with Tiffany. George looked at me with determination and said, It's not right to hide this any longer. You deserve the truth, Sarah. Now it's time to confront them. In that moment, I felt a new strength rise in me. Knowing I wasn't alone, George's courage and willingness to stand by me changed everything. Together, we would face this betrayal. And I finally felt ready to take control of my life again. I looked at George, who had been so supportive, and said, I can't keep living like this. I want to fight back. He nodded, reassuring me. Leave it to me. He immediately picked up the phone and made a call to someone at his company. Before long, John was removed from his position as president. George then encouraged me to file for divorce and to ask for a fair division of our property. Following his advice, I quickly reached out to Ms. Anderson to get everything started. About a week later, John came to my in-laws' house. Furious, he confronted me and George, demanding to know why he had lost his position as president. Just because of his affair. George didn't hold back. He told John it was his own fault for neglecting his duties, causing so much pain to me, and bringing shame to the family. He didn't mince words, making it clear that John was no longer welcome in their home and should never set foot there again. Desperate, John turned to me, begging for a second chance. He wanted me to convince his father to forgive him and to stop the divorce. He promised he would end the affair and even said he'd give up on dividing the property if I just took him back. His words felt empty and selfish. Even after everything he'd done, he was only thinking about himself and what he had lost. I couldn't believe his nerve. You want me to drop the divorce? I asked, stunned. Are you serious? I'm not going back to someone who betrayed me like you did. I'm done with you. John seemed shocked by my response. But I continued. Of course I want this divorce. Why should I stay married to someone who thinks only of himself? Losing her job and this divorce. They're all consequences of your own choices. John, clearly in a panic, tried to change the story, saying the divorce papers were just a scare tactic and that he hadn't meant for things to go this far. I looked him straight in the eye and said, I'm glad to be free from you. You Your mother and Tiffany can stay together. I'm done being part of this mess. Frustrated and out of options, John tried one last time to argue. But I wouldn't listen. I had finally found my voice. And I wasn't going to let him manipulate me again. His selfishness and lies no longer had power over me. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. With George's support, I felt stronger than ever. I was no longer weighed down by John's betrayal and deceit. I was ready to move on, to rebuild, and to finally live without the shadow of his lies hanging over me. I chased John out of the house and slammed the door behind him. I could hear him crying and begging for forgiveness. But neither George nor I responded. We were done with his lies and betrayals. After John lost his job as president, his life quickly spiraled out of control. Tiffany, who had only cared about his wealth and status, turned her back on him and Linda as soon as she discovered he no longer had power or money. With nowhere else to turn, John and Linda found themselves at a cheap motel, struggling to make ends meet. Their savings were depleted, and losing their jobs left them drowning in debt. They could barely afford food or rent. And before long, they had to take any day labor jobs they could find just to survive. Each day became a battle, moving from one job to the next, trying to scrape together enough to get by. Their life had completely changed, and they realized just how much they had lost. Meanwhile, I continued living in George's house, caring for him as I always had. After the divorce, George kindly told me, "You're welcome to stay here as long as you want." His words were a comfort, and they meant so much to me. Grateful for his kindness and support, I decided to make his home my own. He had always treated me with respect and care, and I wanted to give back to him. Recently, George began attending a senior daycare center during the day, where he could socialize and take part in activities he enjoyed. This also gave me the opportunity to return to work. It felt good to have a balance in my life, caring for him while also being able to support myself. Having some independence again was a relief, and knowing George was well looked after during the day gave me peace of mind. Although I know there may be challenges ahead, I feel ready to face them. My life has changed in many ways, but through it all, I have discovered a strength I didn't know I had. George's kindness has shown me that family isn't always about blood. It's about people who truly care for each other. He stood by me when I needed support most, and I'll continue to be there for him, no matter what. Looking back, I am grateful for the lessons this experience has taught me. I have learned to appreciate the people who truly care for me and to stand up for myself when needed. My future feels bright, and although I don't know exactly what lies ahead, I know I'm ready for whatever comes. George and I have built a life together, founded on respect and support. And that is something I wouldn't trade for anything. We've faced hardships, but we've come through stronger. And now, for the first time in a long time, I finally feel at peace.